Matt, in your recent article in the Elliott Wave Theorist Car Crash Trouble for the Auto Business, you mentioned the differences in popular car styles in bull markets versus bear markets, and you talk about social mood and that's impact. Can you elaborate on this for us?
I certainly can, Dana. This article was so much fun to research because I was standing on the shoulders of some giants in the Elliott Wave and socioeconomic literature. Robert Prechter, Mark Alashevsky, Ewan Wilson, Chuck Thompson have all done phenomenal work on the relationship between mood markets and automobiles. And what they found is that when social mood is trending positively, when society's feeling more confident, more optimistic, they're feeling frisky, adventurous, they express that by sending stock prices higher, but they also have a need for speed, size, and power when it comes to cars. So if you look at bull market automobiles, they tend to have more horsepower, they tend to go faster, they tend to have an angular design. It's all part of that confident mentality. But when that psychology changes, so does the behavior and the preferences. And so when social mood becomes more negative, people are more fearful, they're a little bit more pessimistic, they don't have that confidence, they don't have as much of the adventurous spirit, and so you find automobiles are less powerful, less speedy, more rounded in design, because that's reflecting that change in psychology.
That's so interesting. Do you have any examples maybe of just recent past that people might have on their radars, they might remember?
Oh, sure, yes. Think back to the muscle cars of the 1960s, those super speedy, super powerful automobiles that were popular in a bull market. And then in the bear market of the 1970s, shall we say, the power-challenged Pinto and Vega and Gremlin came on the scene. But once mood started to trend more positively in the 1980s and 1990s, you had a big bull market and you had a resurgence in sports cars, or in the 90s, big SUVs that were in basically every suburban driveway. And then more recently, you might remember back in 2008, 2009, during that bear market, there was an opportunity for that miniature smart car that made a splash. So yeah, we've seen these trends manifest over the years for sure.
That was a splash, very, very
It was
in and out.
brief, yes.
What about market indicators? Have you seen any market indicators that have caught your eye that play a role in this?
Well, we find that the stock market is generally the best indicator of social mood. And one of the things that the Elliott Wave theorists identified back in the 1980s is that fifth waves of bull markets, so the ends of these powerful positive mood trends, you tend to see nostalgia. And you see it in pop culture, but you also see it in the auto market. So a lot of the cars that are popular now are sports cars, muscle cars, or SUVs that are inspired by vehicles that were popular back in previous bull markets. So you have a resurgence in muscle cars, a resurgence in SUVs, and these are cars that are inspired by other periods of positive social mood, and we're seeing that. One of the other indicators that we think is so interesting is that not only are these supersized and super fast vehicles popular, but the good old family sedan, just reliable family transportation, seems to be going the way of the dodo bird. At least that's the opinion of many folks in the auto business. We've seen a huge slump in the sedan market. And so when we look at this and we see, okay, size is really popular, speed is really popular, and more economical vehicles are less so, it's a sign that we're probably close to a very interesting juncture in both the markets and in the auto business.
Matt, you mentioned nostalgia, and I'm wondering, why does that come in at the fifth wave?
Well, often what we see in the later term of a bull market is we see times are so good we think back on the times that the good times we had before. So in the 1980s, for instance, you saw at a smaller degree you saw a wave of nostalgia in the music field. So bands started to come on the scene that were inspired by the pop groups of the 1950s and the 1960s. Here in the car business, we're seeing a resurgence in these vehicles that were popular in the 1960s and in the 80s and 90s.
What have you seen in the past few years in terms of total car sales?
Last year was the fourth consecutive year where the U.S. auto market has sold more than 17 million cars. That's a record. That's never happened before. However, if you dig into the numbers, you realize that it's a more complicated story. So while we've hit 17 million for the fourth year, car sales are up a little bit relative to last year, but they're still off of their 2016 all-time high. If you zoom out and look globally, what we find is that car sales overall have slumped. They've started to fall, and they've even contracted in some important domestic markets. So, for example, car sales fell in China last year for the first time in nearly 2 decades. So when we start to look at the stylistic and aesthetic trends that we see in the U.S. auto market, coupled with the global picture, you start to get a sense for how precarious the situation could be for the auto business going forward.
So for someone investing in cars or has a car selling business, what would you tell them about what's next?
Well, there's all kinds of things we could talk about, and the article has a number of ideas. We'll just maybe mention a few here. The auto business sees this resurgence in trucks and SUVs and sports cars and muscle cars as the saviors of the industry that have kept business going while there's a slump in the sedan market. Well, that will seem to be true as long as mood stays positive. When mood transitions toward the negative, today's saviors will look like the albatrosses around the industry's neck. And if you're in the car business, it's very likely that you'll have a lot full of trucks and SUVs and muscle cars, vehicles that the public will not have much of an appetite for. So for the companies who have maintained their sedan line, particularly their compact and their subcompact lines, they'll have something of a safety net when that trend turns. So they'll be able to capture what's left of new vehicle demand. But overall, we would expect the auto business to experience some pretty tough times. So if you're in the business now and times are good, might be worth looking at cashing out while the getting's good.
And what about somebody who is looking to buy a car?
Well, the great news is that if you want to buy a car in a big bear market, you'll get unthinkable deals, at least what you might think would be unthinkable today. And hey, if you need to buy a car in the meantime, or you just want to upgrade, go for it. Just give some thought to how your financial situation might look in a big bear market and budget your purchase accordingly.
Matt, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Dana. It was fun.